When you play the Game of Thrones,
Subscribe and like.
you die. There is no middle ground.
All right, hello YouTube. Welcome back to the Grease Goblins YouTube channel. In today's video, we're going to be tackling the subject of Arianne Martell in The Winds of Winter. I took a couple questions from you guys, so if you ever want to be part of these Winds of Winter Q&A videos, always look out for those community posts. But we're going to be answering a couple questions and trying to figure out where the character goes in Winds of Winter, and some of you guys also had questions for her end game, so we'll talk about her a little bit in A Dream of Spring as well. So let's kind of do a catch-up. Before I dive into your guys' questions and all that stuff, let's just have a recap. So Arianne Martell, from what we get with the Winds of Winter sample chapters, she's on her way to Storm's End. Jon Connington and young Griff and the Golden Company have apparently taken Storm's End by guile. And we're not sure exactly how that's going to go down. I know for me personally, I believe in Winds of Winter, we're probably going to see a couple early chapters with Arianne, Jon Con, and trying to build up to this next conflict with the Tyrell conflict, because you almost have two conflicts back to back. You have how do young Griff and co take Storm's End, but then also how do they defeat Mace Tyrell? So there's going to be a lot there. There's a lot to cover with this plotline early on in the book. So that kind of leads us into a number of questions. Firstly, there's a question from Ryan Van Noy about will they bring Aegon the Conqueror's crown? So for you guys that don't know, this is a bit of a history lesson, but the last time we see Aegon the Conqueror's crown is actually with Daeron the First when he invades Dorne. Now, unfortunately, another sign of legitimacy for the Targaryens is lost. The Targaryens lose a lot of things. They lose their dragons, they lose Blackfyre to, well, the Blackfyres, they lose Aegon's original crown, they lose a lot of their heirlooms. And so many have speculated that the Dornish still have Aegon's crown. Now, where I think that is actually likely, I do think that it's not with Arianne. I believe that if Aegon will be crowned with that crown, it's going to be more that Arianne confirms that this is a Targaryen and all of that stuff. And then maybe Doran sends a party. Maybe he sends, his forces to help young Griff, and that's when the crown will arrive. I do not believe that Arianne has it, but I do think we may see it again in maybe the back end of Winds of Winter or maybe the beginning of A Dream of Spring. But I would say likely maybe the very end of A Winds of Winter when young Griff is crowned in King's Landing. So I think that was a great question to kind of build up into this idea as Arianne's party is getting to young Griff. But we also have some other interesting questions in terms of her and actually her meeting with Aegon and Jon Con. So Chrissy asks, my question for you is how do you think her meeting with Aegon and Jon Con will go? What do you think her and Aegon's dynamic will be? And do you think she'll survive Winds of Winter? So we'll talk about that last question more towards the end of the video. So I'll kind of revisit that as we talk about her fate towards, the end of the story and of Winds of Winter. But the first two questions, I think, again, Arianne is going to be sizing up young Griff to begin with. So the first part of it is going to be figuring out, is this Aegon kid actually a Targaryen? And that's going to be a very difficult thing for Arianne to figure out because young Griff looks the part. He looks like a Targaryen prince. And I don't think Arianne is going to be able to figure out, oh yeah, he's a Blackfyre. Based off the information she's going to know, Jon Connington being there, kind of giving him some legitimacy, the prowess already that their forces have shown, basically conquering a lot of the Stormlands within a matter of days/weeks. Again, I think for the first meeting, it's going to be Arianne kind of feeling out who these people are, and Jon Connington and Aegon. But when we go further with that, I think that there's going to be an interesting dynamic between Arianne and Jon Con. It's going to be a power struggle. We get a question on Instagram from Dom that asks, do you feel George R. R. Martin will make her actually be a big player in the game? I feel she could be. Yes, I think that Arianne in a lot of ways is going to be kind of what we wish we would have maybe gotten with Marjorie, like how the television show gave us more of Marjorie and how she's playing the game. Well, we don't have a Marjorie POV, but Arianne is the closest I think that we would get to that idea, because Arianne to me is a lot like Marjorie. She's trying to scheme and she's good at manipulating people, especially men, which I think will be a huge factor here. I think there is a reason the first real big introduction into the character of Arianne with Eris Oakheart, there's a reason for that. It's to show that Arianne is good at manipulating people. She's described as really beautiful. She's able to kind of charm men. We even saw her kind of doing that in the Arya Hoda chapter we get in A Dance with Dragons. So I personally feel like it's going to be a bit of a power struggle between Arianne and Jon Connington, for influencing young Griff or Aegon, because John Connington is going to want to save Aegon. He wants to save him for Daenerys because of the dragons and kind of uniting the Targaryen claims. But that's a good plan on the surface level. I think young Griff is going to experience something similar to kind of like Robb Stark, where there was a marriage in place, but things go awry, right? And whether for Robb it was emotional vulnerability, here I think it's going to be because Arianne is just masterful at playing men and trying to get them to like her, and it's not exactly that hard because she is extremely beautiful. And so I think that there's going to be a bit of that going on. I think that's going to lead to why there's going to be some hostilities between Daenerys and young Griff. I am a big believer that Arianne will be the queen to Aegon. That's going to answer a lot of questions here. So I'll kind of throw out some names that asked this question, but it was asked by a few people. Matthew Hagon also asked, will she marry Fagon? I do believe she will. And I answered a couple of people's like other questions. Some people asked multiple questions, and one of that question was kind of involved. So we'll get there when we do get there. But I want to go back a little bit. So we had a question from Ashley, my goat mod, that asked kind of this idea. And this is a lot on the idea of Septa Lemore and her identity and how that's going to connect to Arianne because, well, Septa Lemore is going to be with young Griff's party, and we still don't know who this character is. Some people think, it's Ashara. Some people think it's Tyenne's mother. I'm in that camp. Some people believe that maybe it's even Arianne's mother, Lady Malario. So we really don't know who this character is. And so Ashley has this to say. Humor me, say Septa Lemore is actually Lady Malario. This would mean Prince Doran sent Arianne to reunite with her mother. How do you think that reunion would go? How do you think having her mother as her closest advisor will impact Arianne's character? And lastly, will this reunification change Arianne's relationship with her father? So if it is, and again, this is not personally what I believe, but if this was the case, I think it will have a really big impact on Arianne. Arianne has not really had much of a relationship with her mother to begin with. And when you think about it, she may not know some things that her mother was doing. One of the things that is a very distinct quality for Lady Malario is she cares about her children a lot. She didn't want Quentin to be fostered off to someone else. She didn't want Arianne to be sent, across the narrow sea. So she is somebody that, really is protective of her children, and she likes her children, and she was forced really to leave because her and Doran basically have a divorce, albeit it's not a divorce, but that's kind of the idea, right? She leaves Dorne. And so I think that this would have a very deep impact on her because she may look at her father very differently, thinking about how Doran wanted to send her across the narrow sea to just be a cupbearer and all this other stuff. And I think that it would be a very interesting idea. Personally, I do think it's Tyenne's mother, and I think that could be a really interesting idea because I think that Tyene and Arianne will have a conflict later on because I believe Tyene is the person that betrayed Arianne back in her plot in A Feast for Crows. Whole different video. Not going to get into it in this one, but I think that yes, if Arianne is able to reunite with her mother, that's a really big part of the story, right? That would have a huge implication. Imagine you haven't seen your mother in a long time, and all of a sudden she pops back up. Of course, that's going to change you as a person. Efrent, or however you pronounce your name, thank you for the question. I'm just not sure on how to pronounce your name. Asks, what role will Lady Lance play in the meeting between Arianne and young Griff? So, Lady Lance, or Elia Sand, she is this young girl. She's only, I believe, 14 years old. We know that she's already getting up to mischief in the Winds of Winter sample chapters we've gotten with Arianne. I'm not sure what her role is going to be. Could it be that she just causes a major pain in the ass for Arianne? Very possible, right? Could she maybe reveal some information about what the Dornish have been up in the recent books? Maybe possible. I'm not sure what she's going to do. I could very easily see her getting in some situation similar to maybe Arianne herself, where giving her maidenhead away and maybe having a bastard or just causing just general like chaos and disruption within that camp. But I'm not sure, right? Because you'd have to think Arianne is not going to meet young Griff and John Connington with Elia present like in this first meeting. So I'm not sure, to be honest, but I do think that she's been very much described as being kind of a chaotic person. You also say, I don't see Arianne marrying young Griff. I see him falling for Elia Sand. So it would make sense in terms of, I believe Elia and Aegon are of more of an age But I personally just don't see that occurring because I think Arianne has been built up into the story to be the one to fill in that, role. And Arianne, again, we've already seen the foreshadowing of her, playing men and being able to manipulate them. And it's kind of seems like where the story is headed. It's kind of to put a wedge, I believe, between John Connington and Aegon, and then also when Daenerys comes over as well. But you also say maybe, waiting for Daenerys. Again, I think if the smart plan is to have young Griff not marry Arianne, already young Griff should command the Dornish support, given he's playing as, the son of Elia Martell. He should already have the backing of Dorne without a marriage. And so at this point, the idea should be yes, you should wait for Daenerys for her dragons. But again, we've been told in this story so many times things don't usually play out that way. Told plans usually get disrupted. And I believe that's going to be the case here. Young Griff's a young kid. He's going to see a beautiful woman in Arianne who's definitely trying to manipulate him and trying to seduce him and trying to become the queen. I personally find that I think young Griff is going to give in to those charms. But again, it's a contested point, and I would love to hear, your guys' thoughts on that in the comments. Sergey asked the question of, will Arianne and Marjorie ever meet? Now, this is an interesting one because this really banks on, will Marjorie be alive by the time that a young Griff takes the throne? I personally do not think she will be. I think her fate is tied to Tommen, and I believe Cersei, who has already been trying to or get Marjorie killed, will finally succeed. So I think Marjorie is unfortunately doomed to die. I don't believe she will meet Arianne, and so yeah. Personally, I don't see the two meeting or anything of that nature. I also will point this out. If you don't see that I answer your question, it might be that I recorded the video before you put your question in. Or also, I'm trying to not answer questions that aren't really related, like directly to Arianne's plot in the Winds of Winter, or at least background for Arianne. So if you did comment something that's kind of off topic, I did tend to not really use your question all that much. Joe Schaefer asked, do you see Arianne holding power in Dorne or King's Landing by the series end? Well, unfortunately, I believe Arianne is going to die. I believe her fate is tied to Fagon. I believe that, again, the two will be married at this point, and so however Aegon goes down, I believe will also be the same for Arianne. Unfortunately, even though she's growing to be one of my favorite characters, I unfortunately do not think that she has that long to live. I think that she will be right there with Aegon when he's in his full power by the end of Winds of Winter, and I think that also he will come crumbling down. And this kind of also gets into Matthew Stewart's question, so piggybacking off Joe Schaefer's, your comment, what will her fate be? Who's going to kill her if she dies? I could see her being executed by Dragonfire as an example of if she does indeed become Aegon's queen. That's exactly what I think is going to happen. I think that Arianne will, be growing in power. She's going to maneuver her way to being the queen. And then I think that when Daenerys comes over, unfortunately, Aegon may not have a dragon, or even if he does have a dragon, I believe Daenerys is going to beat him. I then think that right there is where Arianne's downfall will be. But young PK has a different take. He says Arianne will lose her father to Daenerys. This way, both her father and brother have died seemingly at Daenerys' hand. She will join Aegon in the war against Daenerys, but in the end, she will help make amends so they fight the others together. She will again be faced with a choice of vengeance and maybe justice and forgiveness. But this time she will choose forgiveness. I also believe her arc will lead her to becoming a good, patient queen of Dorne like she always wanted to be, but not the same person she always was. I would love that if that was the case, PK. I just don't believe that that's going to happen. I think it makes much more sense that Duran, this person that's been planning for the Dornish to get back on top, to get their vengeance and all these things, for all of that scheming to get all of his children killed. To have his family basically wiped out. Oberyn is dead. Watching some of the Sand Snakes die. Watching Arianne die to Daenerys. Quentyn trying to, bring the Targaryens, or at least the dragons, to Dorne's aid. All of this stuff, I think, is going to end up leading and backfiring against Duran, to where he's this person that's sitting here who's already, having a number of physical issues, and now he's lost majority of his family. So I think it's almost the opposite. I think that Arianne will die, and the real impact will be on a character like Duran. But I do think something you point out here that's interesting is the idea of Quentyn's death. How will that impact a character like Duran, like Arianne? And like I already said, I believe that Arianne will be a driving factor as to why young Griff or Aegon may have some issues with Daenerys. When this information comes out that Quentyn died while being a guest of Daenerys, even though it wasn't Daenerys' fault or any of those things, that's going to have a big effect on someone like Arianne, where one of your family members was killed by this woman. Like, that's what she's probably going to believe. And so I look at those things and I go, yeah, I think there's obvious signs there's going to be issues between the young Griff side and Daenerys' side. It may not be at the very beginning. Maybe they try and work together, but that all comes apart because of a lot of things like this. But thank you for your comment, PK. I do just disagree a little bit there. Sion Dryle, I don't think I said that right. But you say, can't wait for the Savas game between Arianne and Fagon where they exchange words using Savas pieces, metaphors, and dragons. Yeah, this was a big part of A Dance with Dragons, especially with Tyrion's plotline, where we see these Savas games in a lot of ways mean more than what just a simple game, right? The whole idea of, young Griff going to Westeros to begin with started with a Savas game where Tyrion was kind of prompting him to do that, was telling him kind of the situation, how Daenerys would view him. And so, yes, I could very easily see Arianne using Savas as something that maybe will help her, manipulate Aegon and let her see into who he is as a person and his strategy and how he thinks. So I do think that that's very much true. Again, just to kind of wrap up, give my conclusion for the character, I do believe that Arianne is going to die, unfortunately, because she will be backing young Griff. Anyone backing young Griff, unfortunately, I think you're just on the wrong side. You don't have the dragons. Daenerys is obviously more of an important character. She's one of the main characters. Young Griff, in my opinion, is definitely going to be viewed as kind of like an obstacle for her, to give her more internal conflict. It's more to develop, I believe, the character of Daenerys than it is for young Griff. Even though I love young Griff as a character, I love Arianne as a character, I really love the entire young Griff camp. I love the Golden Company. I do believe that Daenerys is going to beat young Griff in the end. And that doesn't mean that young Griff and his, party doesn't inflict damages on her. Maybe she loses a dragon to young Griff or whatever. But I do think they're going to be taken out. I think people like, Varys, Illyrio, Arianne, young Griff himself, John Connington, they're all doomed to die, in my opinion. It's just how and when, which I think will all be in A Dream of Spring. I think Winds of Winter, in a lot of ways, will almost feel like Stannis in Book 2 if he won. It's the rise of that king and him taking the throne, which I will believe young Griff will be. I think that young Griff, this is his book. I think this is the Illyrio, Varys, all their planning throughout the books, this is theirs. Like how A Storm of Swords in a lot of ways felt like, Tywin's and Littlefinger's book, this to me will be a Varys book. I think it'll be him finally getting all of his pieces in motion and it all putting together with Aegon on the throne. So, thank you guys all for watching, and I'll see you guys all in the next video. Bye, guys.